Is 1440p gaming really worth it, or should you save your money and stick to 1080p gaming for competitive reasons? Well, let's talk about it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Jawa. Jawa's mission is to be the community for safely buying and selling PC parts at a reasonable price, offering low fees and great customer service, which I can definitely attest to, as I personally bought this RTX 3070 from Jawa anonymously, and not only did it arrive quickly, but when I ran into an issue, they immediately replaced it with a flawless substitute and asked that I only send the old one back after I confirmed the new GPU worked great. And the best part is the price I got this card at was well below other listings I could find anywhere else, likely thanks in part to Jawa's much lower seller fees of 9 to 12% depending on when you join. So if you're interested in buying or selling PC parts on a platform with low fees and great customer service, be sure to click the link in the description below and watch out for some of my hardware that'll likely be popping up very soon. Okay, so a lot of gamers out there who are playing online competitive games, they're still playing games at 1080p in the year of our Lord 2025, and some of you listening to this who are maybe using 4K monitors, you might be disgusted, but yes, it is still the most common resolution in 2025, and no shame, it gives you a lot of performance, so I get it, and it saves you a lot of money. However, we'll discuss all the various resolutions and their pros and cons in this video, but let's just first tackle the 1440p versus 1080p debate in terms of the actual difference that you can see with your eyes, because look, a lot of people are going to tell you what you want to hear, and this goes for 1080p to 1440p or even 1440p to 4K. They might tell you stuff like, look, the difference isn't worth it. However, I'm here to tell you the cold hard truth, and the cold hard truth is going from 1080p to 1440p is a 77% increase in resolution, and going from 1440p to 4K is a 2.25 times increase in resolution, and the difference between those two jumps, it's honestly a pretty similar increase to the actual visual difference. You are going to notice a massive increase in the overall quality of the image. Things are going to be easier to see, especially at a distance, and the higher the resolution that you can go, although it does have diminishing returns, especially beyond 4K, well, the better it's going to be for you, even in competitive games. So is a higher resolution better? Is it noticeable? The answer is definitely yes. So get the highest resolution you can possibly get within your budget and within reason. And that's what we're going to tackle now. Is it reasonable? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the 10 game average at 1440p first to see, what can you expect to get out of a modern GPU. And taking a look at the RTX 40 and 50 series that is present in this chart, you can see that, well, honestly, you get a very high frame rate all the way from the basically 50, 70 and up. You're talking 200 FPS roughly, and you go up to the RTX 5090, 380 FPS at 1440p. That is going to max out basically most monitors on the market today. Now, keep in mind, these are games at the ultra settings, and this does include some games that are very difficult to run. This is not just only competitive games. If it was only competitive games, you could probably double the frame rate, but I wanted to give you an idea of a wide variety of games, including Myth Wukong, Cyberpunk, Black Ops 6, Fortnite, etc. Here's kind of what you can expect. However, if you actually go ahead and we throw in 1080p now, you're going to get around 77% higher frame rates because, well, 1440p is around 77% more pixels. So in a scenario where you're not CPU limited, this is what you can expect. However, that assumes that all these games aren't going to be CPU bottlenecked, and fellas, that is not always the case. I mean, if we take a look here at some information from TechSpot in their 9800 X3D review, well, this thing is actually on average across 14 different games only getting 205 frames per second on an RTX 4090. So if we're going to be generous and say that maybe most of your games are competitive games that allow for much higher frame rates, we could probably say that around 300 FPS is where the fastest CPU on the market today is likely going to cap out across a 10 game average. So that really changes the charts, fellas. I mean, if we take a look here at the 1080p results once again with that 300 FPS limit, you can see that basically once you hit a RTX 4080 Super, anything above that is going to give identical performance. So obviously an RTX 5090 at 1080p for most people, even people who mostly play competitive games, is just going to be a totally insane waste to be playing games at 1080p unless you have a specific one that you definitely know will benefit, that you will not be CPU bottlenecked in. If that's you, hey, great for you. But the vast majority of gamers, this just doesn't make sense. And if we compare it to the 1440p results, you can see the 5090 and the 4090. If you're capping out because of your CPU roughly at 300 FPS, you're not going to see any difference going from 1080p to 1440p in your frame rate, but you'll see a massive difference in the actual visual quality. So definitely, if you got a 4090 or 5090, please move on from 1080p to 1440p and enjoy those benefits, not only for your eyes, but also because you might actually play the games a little bit better if you can see people in the distance better. However, when you look at the RTX 5080 and below, there is at times a noticeable difference in the frame rate. So here's what I would say: the 5080, the 5070 Ti, the 4080 Super, and even the 4070 Ti, all four of those GPUs, I would still urge you to move up to 1440p because, again, we're still at ultra settings on these games. You can reduce settings, and there could be effectively no difference or a very small difference with reduced settings between 1080p and 1440p on your frame rate. In that case, yes, definitely jump to 1440p. However, looking at the RTX 5070 and below, it does start to become a little bit more questionable. Although I would still say 5070 and 4070 Super, I think you should still move on to 1440p unless you specifically have a game that gets massive frame rate improvements at 1080p and you are 100% dedicated to getting the lowest input latency. The only time I would maybe question sticking to 1080p would be maybe the RTX 5060 Ti or a similar GPU or below. So a very budget card. At that point, yes, there's a very significant difference between 1080p and 1440p. And even with reduced settings, it may still be worth sticking to 1080p if you're doing online competitive gaming. Now, that being said, I've used a 5060 Ti to play games upwards of 4K and still get pretty high frame rates, closer to 200 FPS. So it really depends on what you're willing to do with your settings. I think if you're willing to reduce your settings, you could still get away with the 5060 Ti at 1440p. Will it age amazingly? Probably not. However, it will get the job done. And if it were me, I would still jump to 1440p even with the 5060 Ti. However, again, that depends on your situation. So the question of, is 1440p worth it? Well, we kind of have to break down the costs and the benefits. And after looking at all those charts, I think I can safely say that for most people, the answer is going to be yes. You don't really have to get much more of a powerful GPU to go from 1080p to 1440p. That was not the case for 4K. And you could argue that, you know, hey, you look at the 5060 Ti and you're getting 260 FPS at 1080p. To get the same performance at 1440p, you might need a 5070 Ti. So yeah, you're talking about a difference of, you know, hundreds of dollars of difference between both the GPU as well as the monitor. You could save $100 on the monitor, maybe $200, and $300 or more on the GPU, and that's a big difference. So if cost to performance is the only thing you are considering, yes, it's worth sticking to 1080p, but I think for most people, I think you can get away with a very affordable GPU and with a few settings being reduced, get the same frame rate as 1080p because you'll most likely be CPU bound anyway. So is 1440p worth it? The answer to that question is, I think for the vast majority of gamers, yes, it is absolutely worth it. You're not going to have to spend a whole lot more money, but you're going to get a massive visual boost, a lot less aliasing, a lot less pixelization at the proper distance, making it look far better, and you may even play your games better as well because you'll see people potentially better in the distance in games as well. So there you have it. Yes, I do suggest picking up a 1440p monitor over 1080p in 2025, and I'll have the best monitors that I've ever reviewed in the description below as affiliate links for your convenience and my benefit as well if you're considering buying one and you don't know which one is right for you. But hey, that's just what I think. Do you think that 1440p is worth it, or do you think that gamers should still stick to 1080p? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below, and of course, I'll see you in the next video.
If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, AMD and NVIDIA release new GPUs. Also, if you want to see more, check out one of these related videos. You won't be disappointed.